I'm Claire Bennett, 34 years old, head nurse in Raleigh, North Carolina. I live with my only son Ethan. For the past 13 years, I've done everything I could to give him a life that was stable and whole, even if it was missing the one piece he's always quietly longed for. There are things I buried deep, names I swore I'd never say again. Until the past came knocking in the form of a wedding invitation. The envelope arrived on an October morning, its gold trim catching the light, the faint scent of expensive stationery lingering in the air. I almost threw it away, until I read the groom's name, Ryan James Westbrook. And the bride? Brianna Harper, me cousin. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the invitation slipping from my hands onto the cold tile floor. Ryan, father of my son whom I hadn't spoken of in 13 years, was about to marry into my family. And worse. No one knew Ethan existed. But Ethan was about to find out everything. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing that caught the autumn light streaming through my kitchen window. I almost didn't open it. I recognized the handwriting on the envelope, neat and careful, the way Brianna had written since we were kids sharing a bedroom at Grandma's house. Mr. and Mrs. William Harper request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Brianna Marie Harper to Mr. Ryan James Westbrook. I dropped the invitation like it had caught fire. 13 years. 13 years since I'd heard that name spoken aloud, though it lived in my head every single day. 13 years since Ryan Westbrook walked out of my college apartment, leaving nothing behind but the faint smell of his cologne and a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines sitting on my bathroom counter. My hands shook as I picked up the invitation again. There it was in elegant script. The name that belonged to my son's father. The name I'd buried so deep I sometimes convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Mom? Ethan's voice drifted from the living room where he was supposedly doing homework. You okay in there? You sound like you dropped something. I pressed my back against the refrigerator, the cool metal steadying me. How do you tell your 13-year-old son that the father he's been asking about his entire life is marrying your cousin? How do you explain that you've been protecting him from a man who never even knew he existed? I'm fine, baby. I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. Just knocked over my coffee mug. But I wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. I'd spent 13 years building a life in Raleigh, North Carolina, working double shifts at Presbyterian Hospital, watching Ethan grow into this incredible kid who had his father's dark eyes and stubborn chin. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our small apartment that felt like home because it was ours and ours alone. Now this invitation sat on my counter like a bomb with a lit fuse. I thought about Ryan's family, the Westbrooks, with their construction empire that built half of Charleston. I remembered his mother, Donna, and the way she'd looked at me the few times we'd met. Like I was something stuck to the bottom of her designer shoe. A phase, she'd called me once, when she thought I couldn't hear. Boys like Ryan go through phases before they settle down with the right kind of girl. Apparently, Brianna was the right kind of girl. Who's Ryan Westbrook? I nearly choked on my morning coffee. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway, still in his pajamas, holding the wedding invitation I thought I'd hidden in my desk drawer. Ethan, that's private. Is he my dad? The question hit me like a physical blow. In 13 years, my son had asked about his father countless times, but never with this kind of certainty. Never while holding proof. I set down my coffee mug, buying time. What makes you think that, Mom? Ethan's voice carried that patient tone kids use when they think their parents are being particularly slow. I'm not stupid. I know you grew up in Charleston. I know you went to college there. And I know you've never told me my dad's name, which means it's probably someone I shouldn't know about. He held up the invitation. But cousin Brianna's marrying a guy named Ryan Westbrook, and when I googled him, he's from Charleston, he's about the right age, and... He paused, studying my face, and you look like you've seen a ghost. My brilliant, observant, too smart for his own good son had figured out in 10 minutes what I'd spent 13 years trying to hide. Ethan, I want to go to the wedding. Absolutely not. Why? His voice cracked slightly, the way it had been doing lately as he hovered between childhood and becoming a teenager. Are you afraid he won't want me? The raw vulnerability in that question nearly broke me. I wanted to wrap him in my arms and tell him that any man would be lucky to call him son. that he was smart and funny and kind and perfect just as he was. But I also knew that Ryan Westbrook had never wanted him at all. Baby, it's complicated. Everything's complicated when you're 13 and you don't know who your father is, Ethan said quietly. I'm tired of pretending I don't care. I'm tired of making up stories when kids at school ask. And I'm really tired of watching you work yourself to death because you think you have to do everything alone. He set the invitation on the counter between us like evidence in a trial. I'm going to that wedding, Mom. With or without you. Charleston in late autumn was exactly as I remember: ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss, the smell of salt, water and history, everything painted in shades of gold and amber that made the whole city look like a sepia photograph. I'd booked us a room at a modest bed and breakfast 20 minutes from the venue, far enough away that we wouldn't accidentally run into wedding guests at breakfast. Ethan pressed his face to the car window as we drove through the historic district, taking in the grand mansions and horse-drawn carriages like he was seeing a movie set. Did you live here? He asked. For 4 years. College. Was it like this? All fancy and old? I thought about my tiny dorm room, my work-study job in the campus bookstore, the scholarship that barely covered tuition while Ryan drove his BMW to class and talked about spring break in Cabo. It was different when I was here, I said. The wedding venue was Magnolia Estate, a plantation-turned-event space on the Ashley River. Of course it was. The Westbrooks never did anything halfway. I parked next to a line of Mercedes and BMWs, suddenly aware of my 10-year-old Honda Civic and the scuff marks on Ethan's only pair of dress shoes. You sure about this? I asked him. Ethan straightened his tithe navy blue one we'd bought at Target the day before. I've been sure about this my whole life, Mom. I just didn't know what this was until now. The rehearsal dinner was held in the estate's garden pavilion, white lights strung between the columns, round tables covered in ivory linens. It was beautiful in the way that money makes things beautiful, polished and perfect and cold. I spotted Brianna immediately. She looked exactly like our grandmother had at that age, blonde hair in soft curls, pink dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was laughing at something Ryan said, her hand resting on his arm in that possessive way women do when they're about to become wives. And Ryan. God, he looked exactly the same. Tall and broad-shouldered, that easy confidence that came from never having to wonder if you belonged somewhere. He wore his privilege like a well-tailored suit. I chose a table in the back, hoping we could get through the evening unnoticed. But Brianna spotted us during cocktail hour, her smile faltering just slightly when she saw me. Claire. Oh my God, you came. She kissed my cheek, her perfume expensive and overwhelming. And this must be Ethan. You look so grown up. Ethan shook her hand politely. Thank you for inviting us. Of course. Family is family, right? Her laugh sounded forced. Ryan, honey, come meet my cousin Claire. Time slowed as Ryan approached our table. 13 years collapsed into nothing as our eyes met. I watched recognition dawn on his face, followed quickly by something that looked like panic. Claire. He didn't offer his hand. I wasn't expecting to see you here. Brianna invited me. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. His gaze shifted to Ethan, and I saw him do the math. Saw the moment he noticed the dark eyes, the familiar, stubborn set of the jaw. This is my son, Ethan, I said, because someone had to say it. Nice to meet you, Ethan said, extending his hand the way I'd taught him. Always be polite, always look people in the eye. Ryan shook his hand mechanically, his face pale. How old are you, son? 13. I'll be 14 in March. Ryan's jaw tightened. March. He remembered. The wedding ceremony was perfect. Of course it was. Brianna looked like a princess in her cathedral-length veil and beaded gown that probably cost more than my car. The flowers were white roses and hydrangeas. The music was a string quartet, and the October afternoon sun filtered through the oak trees like something out of a fairy tale. Ethan and I sat in the last row, trying to blend into the background. I watched the families file in, the Harpers on the left, looking proud and slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur, the Westbrooks on the right, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from generations of old money. Donna Westbrook wore navy blue and pearls, her silver hair arranged in perfect waves. She glanced back at our section once, her gaze lingering on Ethan with the kind of cool assessment that made my skin crawl. The ceremony began with all the pomp and circumstance money could buy. Brianna walked down the aisle on her father's arm, beaming at Ryan, who waited at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. They looked like they belonged on a wedding cake, beautiful and untouchable and completely at ease in their perfect world. Pastor Williams spoke about love and commitment, and the sanctity of marriage. He talked about how Ryan and Brianna had found each other despite the odds, how their love was a testament to God's plan. I thought about 19-year-old me, sitting in that clinic waiting room, holding Ryan's hand while he assured me that everything would work out, that we'd figure it out together. I thought about coming home to find him gone, his things cleared out of my apartment, my calls going straight to voicemail. If anyone has reason why this couple should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace, Pastor Williams intoned. It was a formality. No one ever actually spoke up at weddings except in movies. Ethan raised his hand. I grabbed his wrist, but he was already standing, already speaking in that clear, confident voice that carried across the entire garden. "Excuse me, sir. I'm not objecting to the wedding, but I have a question for Mr. Westbrook." The garden fell silent. 300 guests turned to stare at my 13-year-old son, who stood there in his target suit with his shoulders squared and his chin lifted in a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was determined not to back down. "Ethan," I whispered. "Sit down." But he stepped into the aisle, and I knew there was no stopping him. This was the moment he'd been building toward his entire life, even when he didn't know it. "My name is Ethan Bennett," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent garden. "My mom is Claire Bennett, sitting right there in the back row. And I was wondering, Mr. Westbrook, why you never asked me if I wanted to meet my father." Chows. That's the only word for what happened next. 300 wedding guests erupting into shocked whispers, phones appearing as people started recording, Brianna's veil fluttering as she spun around to stare at Ethan with her mouth open. Ryan stood frozen at the altar, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Shock, recognition, panic, and something that might have been grief. "I don't know what this boy is talking about," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Donna Westbrook rose from her front row seat like an avenging angel in navy blue. "This is preposterous. Ryan, tell them. Tell everyone this child is mistaken." But Ethan wasn't done. My brilliant, brave, foolish son reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is my birth certificate," he announced, holding it up for everyone to see. "It says my father is Ryan James Westbrook. Born the 15th of October, 1985. Is that you, sir?" I wanted to disappear. I wanted to grab Ethan and run. I wanted to protect him from what was coming next, because I knew Donna Westbrook, and I knew she would destroy him to protect her son. "That proves nothing," Donna said, her voice cutting across the garden like a blade. "Birth certificates can be falsified. This child is clearly the result of some desperate woman's attempt to..." "Stop." The voice came from the Harper side of the garden. My Aunt Evelyn stood up slowly, her face flushed with anger. "Just stop, Donna. We've all kept quiet long enough." Evelyn was my mother's younger sister, the one who'd helped me through my first year of nursing school when money was tight. She was small and soft-spoken, but when she was angry, she could command a room. "I was there," she continued, walking toward the altar with measured steps. "I was there when Claire called Ryan, crying, to tell him she was pregnant. I was there when she wrote him letters that were returned unopened. And I was there when your private investigator came to our neighborhood, asking questions about Claire's character." The garden was dead silent now. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. "You knew," Evelyn said, pointing directly at Donna. "You've known about Ethan since before he was born. You made sure your son never found out because you couldn't bear the thought of that baby belonging to your family." Brianna pulled off her veil with shaking hands. "Is this true, Ryan? Do you have a son?" Ryan looked from Brianna to Ethan to his mother, and I saw the exact moment he realized his perfect world was crumbling around him. He stopped, started again. "I never knew. I swear to God, Brianna, I never knew." "Because your mother made sure you didn't know," Evelyn said. "She paid Claire to move away. She threatened her scholarship. She made it clear that if Claire ever contacted your family again, there would be consequences." All eyes turned to Donna, who stood there in her pearls and her perfectly arranged hair, looking for the first time like a woman who had been caught. I was protecting my family, she said finally. From what? Ethan asked quietly. From me? And that question, delivered in the clear voice of a 13-year-old boy who just wanted to know his father, broke something in the crowd. I heard people murmuring, saw heads shaking in disgust. Brianna looked at Ryan with tears streaming down her face. How could you not know? How could you not even wonder? Because I trusted my family to tell me the truth, Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Well, Brianna said, pulling off her engagement ring and pressing it into his palm. Now you know. The bed and breakfast room felt like a sanctuary after the chaos of the wedding. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, still wearing his dress shirt but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He hadn't said a word during the drive back, just stared out the window as Charleston's historic district blurred past. Are you okay? I asked finally. He looked up at me with those dark eyes that were so much like his father's, and I saw something in them I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but a kind of deep sadness that made my chest ache. Did he really not know about me? Ethan asked. I sat down next to him on the bed. I think he really didn't know. But you tried to tell him? I tried everything. Phone calls, letters, emails. I even showed up at his office once. I remembered that day, clear security escorting me out while I was still trying to explain. His mother made it very clear that I wasn't welcome in their world. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing. Do you think he would have wanted me? If he'd known? It was the question I'd been dreading for 13 years. I don't know, baby. I honestly don't know. That's what I was afraid of, he said quietly. That even if he knew, he still wouldn't want me. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Soft, tentative. I looked through the peephole and my heart stopped. Ryan stood in the hallway, still wearing his tuxedo pants and white dress shirt, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. It's him, I whispered to Ethan. My son straightened his shoulders. Let him in. I opened the door, and for a moment, Ryan and I just looked at each other. 13 years of silence stretched between us. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside, and he entered our small room. He looked around at our suitcases on the luggage rack, at Ethan's homework spread across the desk, at the life we'd built without him. I didn't know, he said, looking directly at Ethan. I swear to you, I didn't know you existed. I believe you. Ethan said simply. Ryan's composure cracked slightly. Your mother tried to tell me. She tried so many times, and I thought she was just trying to get attention. My mother told me she was lying, that she was trying to trap me. He scrubbed his hands over his face. God, I was such an idiot. You were young, I said, surprising myself by defending him. That's not an excuse. He knelt down so he was at eye level with Ethan. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry you had to grow up without a father because I was too proud and too stupid to see what was right in front of me. Ethan studied his father's face with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail. What happens now? I don't know, Ryan said honestly. What do you want to happen? I don't want you to be my dad just because you feel guilty, Ethan said. And I don't want you to pretend to care about me because people are watching. What do you want? Ryan asked. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I want to know you. I want to understand where I come from. And I want to know if you're proud of who I am. Not just sorry for what you missed. Ryan smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. Tell me about yourself. 6 months later, I sat in my car outside Ethan's school, watching him walk toward me with that easy confidence that seemed to come more naturally these days. He'd grown 2 inches since the wedding, shot up like a weed, and I'd had to buy him new clothes twice. He climbed into the passenger seat and buckled his seatbelt, the routine so familiar it was like muscle memory. How was school? I asked. Good. Mr. Peterson wants me to enter the science fair. Something about my genetics project being exceptionally thorough. He grinned at me. Wonder where that came from. I laughed despite myself. Ethan's 8th grade genetics project had become a minor obsession once he'd started comparing his traits to both Ryan's and mine. The scientific method, he'd announced, was much more reliable than guesswork. Speaking of genetics, I said, pulling a letter from my purse. This came for you today. Ethan took the envelope, his eyes widening when he saw the return address. It's from Dad. Dad. It had taken 3 months for that word to feel natural. For both of them to stop dancing around it. Ryan had earned it slowly, with consistent Saturday visits and awkward phone calls that gradually became easier, with showing up to Ethan's basketball games and helping with homework over video chat. Aren't you going to open it? I asked. Ethan carefully tore open the envelope and pulled out a letter, and what looked like a brochure. His eyes scanned the pages quickly, then he looked up at me with excitement. He wants to know if I'd like to visit Charleston this summer. There's an engineering camp at the College of Charleston, and he thought. Ethan paused, suddenly uncertain. Would that be okay with you? 6 months ago, the thought of sending my son to Charleston would have terrified me. Now, it just made me proud of how far we'd all come. What do you want to do? I asked. I want to go. But only if you're really okay with it. I reached over and ruffled his hair, which he'd started styling differently since Ryan told him it looked more mature, pushed back from his forehead. I'm really okay with it. We drove home in comfortable silence, and I thought about how much had changed since that October morning when the wedding invitation arrived. Ryan had kept his word about wanting to know Ethan, not just make up for lost time. He'd moved his primary office to the Raleigh area, not to be close to us but to make regular visits easier. He'd started contributing to Ethan's college fund, but only after asking me first if I was comfortable with it. Most surprisingly, he'd never once criticized how I'd raised Ethan alone. Instead, he'd told me more than once that he was amazed by the young man I'd helped Ethan become. The apartment felt different too. Not because anything major had changed, but because it no longer felt like a fortress we'd built to keep the world out. Now it felt like home base, the safe place we returned to after adventures. Mom? Ethan said as we pulled into our parking spot. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? Really forgive him? I considered the question. I think I already have. It just took me a while to realize it. Good. He said. Because I think Dad's still figuring out how to forgive himself. 1 year later, I stood in the wings of the Raleigh Convention Center's main auditorium, watching Ethan adjust his tie at the podium. The North Carolina Young Speakers Championship was a big deal, kids from across the state competing with speeches on topics they were passionate about. Ethan had titled his speech, The Science of Belonging, and he'd been working on it for months. In the audience, I could see Ryan sitting in the third row, leaning forward slightly the way he did when he was completely focused on something. Next to him sat my Aunt Evelyn, who'd become an unexpected bridge between our family and the Westbrooks. Even Donna was there, in the back row, still stiff and formal but present. The changes hadn't been easy for anyone. Ryan's engagement to Brianna had ended that day at the wedding, though she'd sent Ethan a Christmas card with a note saying she was glad he'd found his father, even if it meant losing her fiancé. Ryan had sold his house in Charleston and bought a smaller place in Raleigh, trading proximity to his family's business for proximity to his son. And I'd started writing again. It began as therapy, really just getting the story down on paper, trying to make sense of 13 years of silence and secrets. But then I'd shared some of it online, on a blog for single mothers, and the response had been overwhelming. Other women shared their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. A literary agent had reached out last month, interested in turning my blog posts into a book. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer said, please welcome Ethan Bennett with his speech, The Science of Belonging. Ethan stepped up to the microphone with confidence that still amazed me. When had my little boy become this poised young man? When I was 12, he began. I thought belonging was about having the right answers. I thought if I could just figure out who my father was, where I came from, what made me me, then I'd finally fit somewhere. He paused, scanning the audience until his eyes found mine. But belonging isn't about having all the right pieces. It's about accepting that some pieces take time to find their place, and that's okay. He talked about genetics and heredity, about how traits skip generations and how environment shapes expression. He talked about how his mother's determination and his father's curiosity had both contributed to who he was becoming, even when they were separated by years and pride and hurt. Some people might look at my family and see something broken, he said. A single mom, an absent father, a grandmother who made mistakes she's still learning to fix. But I see adaptation. I see resilience. I see people who found their way back to each other because love is stronger than fear, and truth is stronger than silence. In the audience, I saw Ryan wipe his eyes. Donna Westbrook sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, but I thought I saw her nod slightly. My mom used to tell me that some flowers bloom late, but that doesn't make them less beautiful, Ethan continued. Maybe my family bloomed late. Maybe we took the long way to find each other. But we're here now, and that's what matters. When he finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. Ethan smiled and gave a small wave, then walked off the stage with the same confidence he'd shown that day at the wedding when he'd changed all our lives. Later, as we celebrated at Ethan's favorite restaurant, Ryan raised his glass of sweet tea. To second chances, he said. To late bloomers, I added. To family, Ethan finished, however we find it. As I looked around the table at my son who'd grown so tall and sure of himself, at Ryan who was learning to be the father he'd never had the chance to be, at Aunt Evelyn who'd fought for truth when it mattered most, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that take time to unfold. Sometimes magnolias do bloom late. But they're still magnolias, and it's still their season. Outside the restaurant windows, Charleston's autumn light painted everything gold, and for the first time in 14 years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged.